Welcome back. Now, the BankservAfrica Economic Transactions Index moderated to 135.8 in June, reflecting a pullback of 0.5%. The good news is, while it is a slowdown, at the current level, the index is nearly 2% higher than it was in March, and therefore signals a positive outcome in the second quarter. This largely thanks to over 100 days of no load shedding. Independent Economist Elize Kruger joins us with greater perspective on the index and what it suggests for economic activity moving forward. Thank you so much for your time, Elize. Now, quite a lot of moving parts in, the state of the economy and the state of the consumer at this point. What's interesting for me is that there seemed to be a lot of uncertainty building up to the elections, to the point where companies and consumers were delaying some of their purchases. So it's quite interesting to me that economic activity moderated in June after the welcome outcome that we got out of the elections. Is there a clear reason for the slowdown in June?
Sandy, yes, I think on the one side, yes, uncertainty about the election outcome initially placed pressure on economic activity sort of pre the election.
Yeah.
And in the month of June, the month that we looked at now, we actually noted a similar uncertainty still being expressed among participants in the economy. And now it was more about the new political dispensation, the new government of national unity. What will it look like? What will be the outcome? And as you know, we only really had that right at the end of June. So the whole month of June remained a month of quite a lot of uncertainty as to how the whole situation will pan out at the end. So yes, economically, you mentioned load shedding. I also thought it could have looked a bit better given load shedding, but it was really an indication that I think the uncertainty, as well as, talking about the election activities, we had quite a few temporary workers employed in the run-up to the elections, and those people have now fallen out of, the economic activity sphere again, as they basically just worked for the month of the election. So that could also have played a role in this bit of slackness that we've picked up on the BETI.
So I hear you on that, because it's also something that we haven't really thought about, that the actual electioneering activity was, boost in, the transactions that we saw, but also the employment figures that we saw around about May. Elize, is there anything to note about the payment stream areas, regarding the transactions and volumes that stood out?
Yes, actually, we had weakness quite broad-based in the month of June on all the different payment streams, really, except the one, debit check, that's basically your debit order stream. There we saw a small volume growth, but especially on EFT credits, that's our sort of highest weighting within the BETI, we had quite a notable drop, and we also saw lower numbers really for real-time clearing, for PayShop, and for debit. So it was quite a broad-based weakness evident in the month of June. But I do think we might see a bit of a pickup again in July. So we've got more info now about our government. We still have no load shedding. I hope that we can start to see that those that have been sitting on their hands waiting for more clarity, especially in terms of fixed investment spending projects, could start to move forward on those.
Well, it's actually quite interesting, Elize, that you talk about the increased volume growth in the debit check transactions. Does that mean, speak to more credit being taken out, but really also signaling a consumer that's still strained cash-wise?
So the debit check is basically like a debit order, so it could mean a bit more activity on that front. But yes, I think overall, if we think about households and the pressure that household budgets have been under, there's still a lot of that going on. And for that matter, we could still see a bit more credit extended before we get relief. And talking about relief, say on the interest rate front, we're looking at perhaps a cut towards September and towards the end of the year, which will help household budgets somewhat. But where we are now, and what the BETI is really measuring, is more economic activity as opposed to debt.
All right. Well, let's talk about economic growth. Does this set any kind of tone for economic growth in the second quarter?
Yes, indeed. So although June's number disappointed being lower, if we still look at it compared to the March index level, it is up by 1.6% quarter on quarter, really signaling that we have had a better quarter compared to quarter one. As you remember, we had a contraction of 0.1%. So I do think we're going to see positive growth in the quarter two, and in that way also alleviate, any potential for a sort of a technical recession. But numbers are still low, overall for the economy. And if you look at the full year, we're really only looking at about 1% real growth for 2024 compared to last year's 0.7. So it's just a marginal improvement. We still
Yeah.
need to break out of this low growth mode to
Yeah.
lift, the growth profile meaningfully.
I mean, just looking at what we've seen, I think we've seen kind of a half of 2 quarters so far. You talk about obviously the contraction that we saw in economic growth and activity in the first quarter, and then kind of a picking up in the second quarter. But looking at, some of the green shoots that are expected. For example, you talk about interest rate cuts that are expected at around September. Do you think that so far it looks like we have reached a bottoming out of the hardships of the consumer?
Yes, I do believe so. That we at the moment we're basically plateauing at the current level, so we have not managed to improve. But I do not think that we're going to see a worse scenario from here
Yeah.
onwards, based on two expectations. The one is a further moderation in our consumer price inflation, which I do think will be around 4.5% on average in the fourth quarter of this year. That's exactly where the Reserve Bank wants to see headline inflation. So I do hope and sincerely hope that they will start to think about cutting in the September MPC meeting, and then perhaps give us a second cut in November. So it will be slow improvement, slow alleviation. But I think when we come to the end of the year, consumers will hopefully feel slightly better compared to where they are now.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and giving us your insights there, Elize. Really appreciate it. That was Independent Economist Elize Kruger.